Hey guys! In today's video, I bring you the incredible story of Isolde Hawk, a science teacher who never believed in the supernatural, but after a near-death experience, discovered a shocking truth about what happens to souls after death. What she saw in the third heaven will challenge everything you believe. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any incredible stories like this. Now get ready for a journey that will transform your outlook on life and eternity. My name is Isolde Hawk, and I never thought that anything outside of science could shape my life. I grew up in a humble house in Springdale, a small, welcoming place where everyone knows everyone. My mother, a dedicated nurse, believed in miracles and angels. My father, a carpenter, had a pragmatism that better aligned with mine. From a young age, I felt like I needed evidence to believe something. Maybe that's why I fell in love with science. Becoming a biology and chemistry teacher was a natural extension of this intellectual curiosity. At the local school, I was known as Dr. Facts. When students asked me about the possibility of life after death or spiritual phenomena, I always firmly said, if it can't be proven, it's just a belief. And beliefs aren't always facts. My mornings were full of practical classes, detailed explanations about DNA, atoms, the wonder of the human body. There's no mystery, I used to say. Science explains everything, from the smallest organism to the expanding universe. However, there was something empty in my life. My 10-year marriage had ended bitterly. Although I told myself everything was fine, the silence of the lonely nights said otherwise. The relationship with my parents had become more distant over time, and the lack of real connections felt like a constant. Still, I was proud of my routine. I woke up every day at 5 a.m. to run, a discipline I maintained to ward off anxiety and stress. Running was my time to empty my mind, as I used to say. It was there that I often felt most at peace. That autumn morning, the air was cool. The sun was just beginning to paint the sky with golden tones. I put on my running shoes, as I did every day, and went out to tackle another 5-kilometer route. I didn't know that that would be the last day that my life would go on as expected. It was in the 3rd kilometer that I felt the tightness in my chest. At first, I thought it was something temporary, perhaps momentary tiredness, but the pain grew, radiating to his arms. My legs shook, and I fell to the ground, out of control. The last thing I saw was the blue sky between the leaves of the trees, before everything disappeared. When I fell to the ground, the world around me seemed as distant as an echo. I could hear muffled voices and footsteps running towards me, but I couldn't react. It was as if my body was there, but the conscious part of me, was stuck somewhere between thought and nothingness. The pain, once overwhelming, suddenly disappeared, leaving only an emptiness. Then something strange happened. I started to feel light, almost weightless, as if something was pulling me up. I opened my eyes, or at least that's what I thought. It was not the common view. It was like seeing with your heart. I saw my body on the ground, surrounded by people who looked distressed. Someone was yelling, "Call 911." A man knelt beside me, pressing my chest repeatedly. The sound of my own stuttering breath was horrible, but I didn't feel panic. It floated about 2 meters above my body. The vision was strangely clear, as if every detail, the buttons on the man's shirt, the fallen leaves around him, the light passing through the branches, were amplified. I tried to scream, but I had no voice. I tried to move my arms, but there were no arms. The thought should have terrified me. But instead, a feeling of absolute peace enveloped me. It was as if everything was happening exactly as it should. Slowly, the sound of paramedics arrived. I heard someone say, "Weak pulse, prepare the defibrillator." I saw them place the device on my chest, but before the shock hit me, I felt a pull. Something was pushing me away, not physically, but as if an invisible current was carrying me. Suddenly, the view of the park disappeared. I was enveloped by a deep but not frightening darkness. It was like a space between one thought and another, a welcoming void. On the horizon, I saw a vibrant, bright light like a portal. The light pulsed, and each pulse seemed to call me. An irresistible force was guiding me towards it, and the closer I got, the more I felt a presence that radiated love and acceptance. I was being led into something I couldn't understand, but I instinctively knew was important. The approaching light was unlike anything I had ever seen. It wasn't just brilliant, it felt alive, pulsing in gentle rhythms that synchronized with something inside me. There was no heat or coldness, but a comfort that transcended any physical sensation. The closer I got, the more I realized I wasn't alone. I felt presences around me, invisible but unmistakably real, as if a crowd were welcoming me with silent love. When I passed through the tunnel, I was enveloped by an explosion of colors and sounds. Flowers that seemed to be made of light surrounded the room, emanating a sweet scent that was not only felt, but also remembered, as if I had known that aroma in another life. There were green fields, mountains in the distance, and rivers that seemed to be made of liquid crystal. It was a place beyond human imagination, but at the same time strangely familiar, like a home I didn't know I was looking for. As I walked, or rather, floated, I felt a presence approaching. My heart, or whatever I had at that moment, sped up. Then I saw her, my grandmother, Margaret, who had passed away 15 years ago. But she wasn't as I remembered, elderly and frail. She was young, radiant, with a smile so warm it almost made me cry. Her hair was full and shiny, and her eyes, the same eyes I had always loved, shone with a light that came not from without, but from within. "Isolde, dear," she said, holding out her hands. His voice was so familiar, but filled with a serenity I had never heard before. I ran, or maybe I simply thought about getting closer, and felt his arms wrap around me. It wasn't like a physical hug. It was like my soul was being touched. "You haven't finished your journey yet," she said softly, "but there is something you need to see before you go back." Before I could respond, I felt another presence approach. It was a more intense light, but not blinding, and it emanated an energy so pure that it made me fall to my knees, or at least I felt like I should. I knew, without anyone having to tell me, that it was Jesus. He didn't have a specific appearance. It was as if every face I had ever imagined for him was there at the same time. His eyes radiated pure, unconditional love, and his voice was both a whisper and thunder. "Isolde," he said, with a tenderness that pierced my soul, "come, I will show you what you need to understand." Jesus led me through that place he called Third Heaven. The feeling was that I was floating next to him, although everything seemed so natural, as if the concept of gravity didn't exist there. Each step we took, if you could call them steps, seemed to carry a greater purpose, as if the simple walk were a prayer. "The third heaven is a place of transition," he began to explain, without moving his lips, as if his words were transmitted directly to my mind and heart. "Here, souls rest, learn, and prepare to continue their spiritual journey. I want you to see how love and choices shape each person's destiny." In front of us, an indescribable landscape opened up. It was like a vast territory divided into distinct regions, but harmoniously connected. Jesus pointed to an area filled with flowering fields and trees whose leaves shone like liquid gold. "These are the areas of peace and rest," he said. There, I saw people smiling, some sitting on benches under gigantic trees, others walking in groups or alone, all surrounded by a light that seemed to come from the environment itself. These souls lived their lives with love and integrity. Here they rest in peace, experiencing the fullness of divine love as they await the moment of their final ascension. I saw my grandmother among them, sitting under a tree, smiling at me from afar. The look in her eyes seemed to say, "Everything is fine." My heart was filled with joy, but before I could run to her, Jesus led me to another region. We arrived at a place that looked like a vast crystal library. Souls were gathered in groups, some sitting in circles, others being guided by figures of light that radiated wisdom. "These are the areas of learning and growth," Jesus continued. "Here are the souls who still need to grow spiritually, overcome hurts, forgive or understand the choices they made in their earthly life. They are guided by angels and beings of light who help them learn and evolve." Among those souls, I recognized a childhood friend, Lara. She seemed deeply concentrated, listening attentively to a being of light who was explaining something to her. I remembered how she had died young, carrying trauma and resentment. Tears came to my eyes as I realized she was finally finding healing and peace. Finally, we went to a darker region. There was no explicit suffering, but the environment was cold and silent, like a place of deep introspection. I saw lonely souls, each in their own space, surrounded by shadows that seemed to reflect their own emotions. "These are the areas of darkness and isolation," said Jesus, with an expression of infinite compassion. "Here are those who have turned away from the light by their earthly choices. But look, and then I saw beings of light walking among those souls, offering them help. Even here, there is hope. Each soul has the opportunity to redeem itself and return to divine love. Free will is a gift that is never taken away. I recognized a distant relative, William, who had passed away years before. He seemed lost, but a being of light was at his side, holding his hand. For the first time, I understood that no one was completely lost, and that God's love reached even the darkest places. Jesus looked at me, as if he could see what was going on in my mind. Do you understand now? What you do on earth, how you love, forgive, and choose the light, shapes your journey. But never forget, love is the essence of everything. It is the path to redemption and fulfillment. As we walked back to the central area of third heaven, I felt as if something was expanding within me, a deep understanding that went beyond words. Jesus stopped, and his next words penetrated my soul as if engraved into its essence. Life on earth is a unique opportunity, he began, with a voice that mixed authority and tenderness. It is a gift that allows each soul to grow, love, and connect with their divine essence. Everything you do, every choice, every thought, shapes not only your own soul, but the world around you. I felt a mix of shame and hope upon hearing this. I began to remember times when I acted selfishly or harshly, especially in my work as a teacher. How many times have I ignored my students' emotions, focusing only on what I considered scientific truth? How many times have I stopped extending a helping hand because I thought it wasn't my place? Jesus, noticing my thoughts, continued, "There is no condemnation, Isolde. Judgment does not come from outside, but from within. Here, each soul reviews their life with clarity, seeing the impact of their choices, not to suffer, but to learn. This is how real growth happens." At this moment, a scene unfolded before me. It was like I was watching a movie, but I was the protagonist. I saw my entire life projected in detail, moments of kindness that I had forgotten, like helping a student who was struggling with chemistry, but also the moments when I was too harsh, insensitive. The most impressive thing was seeing how each action, no matter how small, reverberated in waves, impacting the people around me in ways I had never realized. "Do you understand now?" Jesus asked, with a smile that conveyed infinite understanding. Love is the most powerful force in the universe. It is through love that you touch other souls, and in doing so, you touch the very heart of God. "What about those who fail to love?" I asked, still thinking about the souls I saw in the shadowy areas. "Even they have the chance to return," he replied. "Divine love is unconditional. No matter how far away someone is, there will always be a hand out to bring them back if they choose to accept. Choice is the essence of free will." Jesus then showed me something that changed my worldview forever. It was as if I could see the earth from above, not just as a planet, but as a living network, connected by threads of light that linked each soul to the next. Every act of kindness, every forgiveness, strengthens this network. But the opposite is also true. When you act selfishly or angry, the connection weakens. That's the responsibility of life, choosing to build and nurture those connections. As he spoke, I felt a mixture of humility and purpose rising within me. For the first time, I understood that life was not about accumulating knowledge or achievements, but about learning to love, forgive, and help. And above all, about understanding that every choice counts. Before we continued, Jesus turned to me and said, "Remember this, Isolde. The earth is a school, and the biggest learning you can take away from here is this: love deeply, not just the ones who love you back, but the ones who need your love most." I felt my tears fall, even though I was no longer in my physical body. For the first time in years, I felt true hope that my life had meaning far greater than I could have imagined. After absorbing Jesus' teachings, I felt that he wanted to show me something even deeper. His gentle but firm gaze guided me towards the horizon, where a light fog began to lift. "There is much more than meets the eye, Isolde," he said. "The third heaven is just a part of the divine plan. There are infinite layers, all connected by love and purpose. I want you to see beyond." Suddenly, the landscape began to change. The vibrant flowers and heavenly fields gave way to a sight that defied logical description. It was as if I was looking at completely different worlds, full of colors, shapes, and energies that seemed to pulsate with a life of their own. Each dimension was unique, some bright and welcoming, others mysterious and filled with shadows that seemed not threatening, but rather deeply introspective. Jesus gestured to one of these dimensions. These are upper layers of heaven, where more evolved souls continue their journey of learning and connecting with the divine. Here, love is so pure that it becomes impossible to express it in words. One day, all souls who choose the light will get there. As I watched, I saw luminous shapes that looked like angels, but different from what I had ever imagined. They had no wings, no clear human features. They were pure energy, moving like waves of light that seemed to sing. I felt an almost irresistible attraction to that dimension, as if it represented the final destination of everything that is good and true. Then Jesus pointed to another area, further away. This one was darker, but there was something intriguing about it. This is a dimension of deep healing, he explained. Souls who are still trapped in their deepest traumas and pain come here to face their wounds. It is not a place of punishment, but of confrontation. Only by facing our own shadows can we find the true light. At that moment, I felt a presence next to me. It was not Jesus, but something or someone different. It was as if a gentle, curious energy was watching me. I looked up and saw a figure that looked human, but had eyes as bright as stars. Before I could ask, Jesus answered my thought. Yes, there are other beings beyond your earthly understanding, civilizations from other worlds, which are also part of the divine plan. They have evolved spiritually in different ways, but they are linked to you by the same network of love and light. The revelation was overwhelming and, at the same time, incredibly comforting. We were not alone in the universe. Other beings, who also sought light and love, existed in realms and planets beyond our imagination. But remember, Jesus continued, each soul's spiritual growth must begin within itself. No matter where or how you live, the essence is always love. As he spoke, I realized I was getting a glimpse of something much greater than I had ever imagined. Life, death, the universe. It was all part of a vast interconnected plan. It was impossible to understand everything at once, but I knew that experience would stay with me forever. Before we moved on, Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder and said, now you know that your existence is just one thread in an infinite tapestry, but even the smallest thread is essential to the beauty of the whole. The moment of farewell to the third heaven came faster than I expected. Jesus took me back to the serene field where my grandmother, Margaret, sat under a golden tree. The environment, which had previously seemed eternal, now carried a sense of transience, as if I was preparing to leave. Despite the comfort and peace I felt there, something in my heart knew that I still had a journey to complete. My grandmother got up and came to me with that welcoming smile that always made me feel protected. She held my hands, or at least, what felt like my spiritual hands, and looked at me with an intensity that conveyed more than words could say. Isolde, my dear, it's not your time yet, she said, her voice full of tenderness. There is much you need to do. You have seen, learned, and felt things that few have the opportunity to experience. Use that. Take that light back and share it. The earth needs people who choose love. I wanted to respond, but words seemed useless given the weight of what she was saying. Instead, I just nodded, feeling tears run down something that was no longer my physical face, but my soul. Jesus, who was at my side, looked at me with infinite compassion. You have been transformed, he said, but the true transformation is completed in the physical world, where choices still matter. What you saw here is universal truth, but its impact depends on what you do with it when you return. Before I could ask how I would know what to do, he continued, trust in love, Isolde. He will be your compass. And remember, your mission is not to save everyone, but to touch those who are ready to listen. Change happens one heart at a time. Margaret hugged me one last time, and this time I felt a warmth so deep that it seemed to permeate every part of my being. You will always be loved, no matter where you are, she said. And one day, we will meet again, when the time is right. Suddenly, I felt a pull. It was as if something was pulling me back, not violently, but firmly. The heavenly landscape began to disappear, and in its place, I began to feel a distant pain, which grew stronger by the moment. My body. I was returning to my body. I heard muffled voices that soon became clearer. Shock administered. Pulse recovered, shouted a voice. My eyes slowly opened, and the bright sunlight filtering through the trees seemed dim and dull compared to what I had just left. Paramedics were all around me, sweaty and tense. One of them sighed in relief. "She's back," he said, looking at the others. I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry. I wanted to shout to them what had happened, tell them about the third heaven, about Jesus, my grandmother, and the souls I saw. But I couldn't. Instead, I started crying, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude. I had been given a second chance, and I knew this chance could not be wasted. The days following my return were a mix of physical recovery and an emotional and spiritual awakening that I had never imagined. My body was fragile, sore from the heart attack and the paramedics' efforts to revive me, but my mind and soul were more alive than ever. Every breath I took felt charged with purpose, as if the simple act of being alive was a sacred gift. In the hospital, while I was recovering, I reflected on everything I had experienced in the third heaven. Jesus' words echoed in my mind. "The earth is a school." Those words changed everything. I began to see my life in a new light. How who had always been so skeptical, so dedicated to logic and facts, now knew that there was something much bigger than we could measure or prove. The nurses caring for me were the first to notice my change. Before, I would probably have maintained a reserved posture, perhaps even impatient in the face of hospital routines. But now, I felt immense gratitude for their every gesture, for every smile. Whenever one of them came into the room, I made a point of looking them in the eye and saying, "Thank you." It wasn't just an automatic thank you, but a real connection, a recognition that each person had an important role, no matter how small it seemed. When I was finally discharged, the first thing I did was sit in the garden of my house and look at the sky. The leaves on the trees swayed gently in the wind, and the sound of the birds seemed like divine music that I had never noticed before. Everything seemed more alive, more connected. I was seeing the world through different eyes. Returning to work as a science teacher was initially a challenge. How do I explain to my students, so eager for facts and logic, that science was only part of the truth? I decided my approach would be different. I would not abandon science, but I would present it as a gateway to something greater. I began encouraging my students to think about bigger questions. What makes life meaningful? Or, how can we use what we know to create a more loving and connected world? My transformation also impacted my relationships. I called my parents, something I didn't do often. I apologized for distancing myself, and instead of justifications, I just offered my love. To my surprise, my mother cried on the phone, saying she always knew I would come back to them somehow. I started spending more time on simple acts of kindness, a smile for a stranger, extra time with a student who needed support. Small gestures that I had previously ignored now seemed to be the fundamental pieces of the tapestry of life. I discovered that by doing these things, I wasn't just helping others, I was healing myself. Above all, I completely lost my fear of death. The third heaven experience showed me that death is not the end, but a transition. Knowing this gave me a courage and freedom that I had never felt before. Life is precious, and I now knew that every moment was an opportunity to learn, love, and grow. As the months passed, I realized that my experience was not something I could keep to myself. What I saw, heard, and felt in the third heaven had completely changed my view of life and death. I felt it was my responsibility to share these revelations with others, even though many people might not believe me or even judge me. One morning, as I was preparing my classes, I was struck by a clear thought, almost as if someone was whispering in my mind, "Speak, be the voice for those who need to hear." That's when I decided that I would not only teach science, but also talk about the connection between what we can observe and what goes beyond what our senses can capture. In my classes, I began to include discussions about purpose and meaning. After explaining the principles of evolution or the properties of chemistry, he would ask questions that prompted deeper reflection. How do you think our choices shape the world around us? Or, if life is a miracle, how can we live it meaningfully? Some students thought they were just philosophical questions, but others seemed to absorb the messages like seeds planted in fertile ground. I also decided to share my story with friends and family. I started with a small circle, my parents, a close friend, and little by little I expanded. Each time I told it, I observed different reactions. Some people were skeptical, others were curious, but there were those who felt hope. "You made me see life differently," said many. That was my goal. My message has always been clear and direct. Life is a unique opportunity to love and learn. Every choice we make, no matter how small it may seem, contributes to a greater purpose. I was often asked about what I saw and learned. My answer was always the same. Love is the essence of everything. It connects everything and everyone. When we choose to love, we choose light. I also made a point of clarifying something that Jesus taught me. There is no condemnation, only learning. Even those who make mistakes can find their way back, as long as they choose love and forgiveness. This idea comforted many who carried guilt or fear of what might happen after death. I realized that my testimony was not just about what happens after we die, but about how we live now. Teaching, loving, and forgiving became my mission. Life, although full of challenges, is a precious opportunity to grow spiritually and strengthen the connections that unite us. As I reflect on all this, a phrase from Jesus constantly echoes in my mind. The earth is a school, and love is the most important lesson. This simple truth guides my days, and I hope it guides the hearts of those who hear my story. Looking back, I realized that my third heaven experience was not just a glimpse of what comes after life. It was a powerful reminder of how we should live now. Love, which I previously considered just a human emotion, was revealed as a universal force, the energy that connects everything and everyone. During my experience, I saw love in its purest form. He was tangible, almost like a fabric that wove together every soul I encountered. I realized that on earth, we underestimate the power of love. We often confuse it with dependence, obligation, or romance. In the third heaven, love was much more than that. It was a transformative force, capable of healing, uplifting, and connecting even the most lost souls. After my experience, I began to see these invisible connections between people on earth. A smile offered to a stranger seemed to light a small flame of hope. A simple act of kindness, holding the door for someone, helping a coworker, listening without judging, left invisible but powerful marks on both the giver and the receiver. On the other hand, I also noticed how anger, selfishness, and resentment weakened these connections. It was as if every negative thought or act created tiny cracks in the fabric that binds us together. But the most impressive thing was that love could repair these cracks. An apology, a sincere forgiveness, or even a silent intention to change could restore these connections. A clear example of this happened to a student of mine, Kyle. He was a shy young man, always on the defensive and had difficulty interacting with others. Before my experience, I probably would have treated him indifferently, thinking he needed to grow up on his own. But with my new understanding, I began to observe him with more empathy. One day after class, I called him to talk. "Kyle, are you okay? If you need anything, I'm here." He hesitated, but then opened his heart. He had recently lost a relative and felt abandoned and invisible. Just listening without judging created a change. In the following weeks, he began to participate more, smile more, and even helped his colleagues. This small interaction showed me how love and compassion can transform lives, one person at a time. On a universal level, I learned that our actions not only affect those around us, but echo beyond what we can imagine. Every choice we make, to love or hate, to forgive or to hold a grudge, contributes to the balance or imbalance of the network that connects all souls. It is a responsibility and a privilege at the same time. My journey into third heaven was a lesson that love is not just a word or a feeling, but a daily choice. It is through love that we discover who we really are, evolving spiritual beings, connected to something infinitely greater than ourselves. If there is one thing I can leave as a final message, it is this: love deeply, genuinely forgive, and choose the light, even when it seems difficult. Each act of love strengthens the connections that unite us and brings us closer to the divine. Believe me, these choices resonate beyond what we can imagine, both here and hereafter. If you like this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.